Alright, in this section we're going to review how to convert between decimals, fractions, and percents. This is something you should have already covered, but since it's such an important thing to be able to do in Algebra 1, we'll be dealing with lots and lots of fractions, and then it's good to be able to convert those to decimals and percents, and vice versa. We wanted to do a quick review video on the different ways to do these conversions. So I've drawn a triangle here with fraction on one corner, decimal on one corner, and percent on the other corner, and I'm going to draw arrows connecting the two corners together, and along that arrow we'll kind of write in the rule or method for how to do that conversion. So if you have a fraction and you want a decimal, so if you're going from fraction to decimal, all you do is divide the numbers. So long divide or divide in your calculator. So if you have something like 4/7, you literally just do 4 divided by 7, and whatever you get is the decimal equivalent, so long divide. If you have a decimal and you want a percent, so say you have a decimal that's like 0.3, you might know that that's 30%. So to go from decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100 and add a percent sign. That's the same as moving the decimal place 2 digits to the right. So 0.30 becomes 30. If you have a percent and you want to go back to a decimal, you just do the opposite. You divide the number by 100 and you get rid of the percent. So you divide by 100%. So you're always going to be doing the opposite to go back and forth. The opposite of multiplying by 100% would be dividing by 100%. If you have a decimal and you want a fraction, let's look at this option here. If you have a decimal and you want a fraction, so say you have like 0.25. How do you write that as a fraction? You typically first write it as a fraction over 10 or over 100, and then you reduce it. So let's say write as a fraction over 10 or 100, etc., then reduce. And it's hard to explain that without doing an example. So let me do an example over here. So say you have 0.25. You'll write that. You can move the decimal place 2 times to make this 25 over 100. So because you had to move the decimal place 2 times, that's 100. And now 25 over 100, you can reduce this fraction to 1/4. If you had, say you had let me think of another one, 0.125. You could think of this as 0.125 over 1. Okay? So you move the decimal place 1, 2, 3 times, and you get 125 divided by, if you move the decimal place 3 times in the top, that's the same as multiplying by 1,000. Then you have to move the decimal place, which is right here, 1, 2, 3 times in the bottom, which adds 3 zeros. So now you have 0.125 over 1,000, and this is a fraction which you can reduce. So the way in which you reduce this fraction, that's a whole different lesson, I suppose, but you got to find some number that divides evenly into both of these. So for example, you can see that 5 goes equally into both of them. And if you keep reducing and reducing and reducing, you will eventually see that this is equal to 1/8. Okay? So when you're converting from a decimal to a fraction, first write it as a number over 100 or number over 1,000 or a number over 10, depending on where your decimal value is. By moving the decimal place, count how many times you moved it and write that fraction, and then reduce your fraction all the way down. Okay? And you might be wondering, what about going from fractions to percents or percents back to fractions? Well, to be perfectly honest, in order to do that, you typically use decimal as an intermediate. So if you have a fraction, like 3/4, first you convert it to a decimal by dividing 0.75, and then you move the decimal place twice. Or if you have a percent, first you change it to a decimal, and then you change it back to a fraction. Although there is another method to go from percent to a fraction. You could write the percent over 100 equals, is that what it is? Equals fraction? So a percent is always something out of 100. So if you have like 20%, that's the same as 20 out of 100, and then reduce. So to go from a percent back to a fraction, this is a bit of a shortcut, I suppose, because if you convert it to a decimal, if you convert it to a decimal and then you write it as a fraction, you're just going to be undoing what you've done. So to go from a percent to a fraction, you can write the percent out of 100 equals a fraction. So like 20% would be 20 out of 100, and then reduce. So write the percent over 100 and reduce. And to write a fraction as a percent though, there I think you really do want to convert it to a decimal and then multiply by 100. So this has been a quick review of fractions, decimals, and percents. I have a table here on the next page where I can fill some stuff in. Let's do some easy ones here, like 2/3, decimal 0.7, and percent 65%. Okay, so if we have these, let's fill in the missing values. So 2/3 as a decimal. If you do 2 divided by 3, you're going to get 0.6 repeating. So 0.666 repeating. Technically, I just need to write 0.6 repeating, but it's nice. When you do the long division, you'll get 0.6 over and over, and you see that pattern. And when you have a decimal that's infinitely repeating, it's typically better to leave the answer in fraction form. So in Algebra 1, whether you've been comfortable with fractions in the past or not, it's a good time to start getting comfortable with fractions and leaving things in fraction form. So as a percent, this is 66.6%, with that repeating forever. Or if you were going to round it, you would write 66.7% because 6 rounds up. Okay, let's convert 0.7. Well, fraction of 0.7 is going to be 7 over 10 because we had to move the decimal place one time. And 7 over 10 does not reduce, so that's actually a pretty easy one. And then 0.7 to get to a percent, we times that by 100, so we would get 70%. If we had 65%, to convert that to a decimal place, we move the decimal place backwards 2, so move it backwards 2, or divide by 100, so we would get 0.65. And to convert to a fraction, we write this over 100, so we would write 65 over 100, and then we'll need to reduce. 5 goes evenly into both numbers, so 5 goes into 65 13 times, and it goes into 100 20 times, so we could reduce this to 13/20. So I hope that's just a quick, simple review to remind you of how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents.